here we go. Welcome to you both, Sadiq Khan, the Labour candidate, and Shaun Bailey for the Conservatives. In a moment, we'll turn to the huge impact the pandemic has had on the capital. But let's start with the continuing fallout from the case of Sarah Everard, who went missing and was found dead a fortnight ago. Just today, survivor groups have written to the Prime Minister demanding change. It's all raised big issues of safety, protest and policing. Sadiq Khan, key responsibilities for a mayor. You have admitted that women and girls were not feeling safe in this capital, your capital. Why not?
Yeah, well, I've met with Reclaim These Streets, the group, incredible women, doing a really important job shining a spotlight on the issue of safety of women and girls. And we men have to have the humility to realise we may be extremely empathetic, but our experiences are very different than if you're a woman and a girl. And it's all well and good, and we must make sure we protect women. We must also address the behaviour of men and boys. And it starts in schools, by the way. Girls in schools having to wear different length skirts because of the behaviour of boys. Women having to choose to wear flat-soled shoes to run away from danger rather than the shoes they want to wear. Over the last 5 years, we've invested record sums tackling the issue of violence against women and girls. Continue to make progress. London's first ever independent victims Commissioner also investing in support services for women and girls. But this moment should be one where we do what we can to address this really important issue. Not use this as an opportunity to play party politics, but to address the issue of safety of women and girls.
Party politics, he says, straight away to you, Shaun Bailey. But how do you build back confidence?
First and foremost, thank you for having me. Look, the first thing to say is this is one of the most biggest failings going on in London now. For the mayor to come on the radio and say the streets of London are not safe for women and girls is a massive... it's just so painful to me. Both of the mayors before him had London as safe. Safe streets in London are not a luxury, they're a necessity. And there's things we can do to really turn this around. And that's why you hear me talk about 8,000 extra police officers. That's why you hear me talking about CCTV cameras on every bus stop, doubling the police officers on the transport network. But the most important thing is we need to speak to our young men. I've been a youth worker for over 20 years now, and that's a conversation we constantly had. How do you respect the people around you, both men and women? But right here, right now in London, if the streets are not safe, that is the responsibility of the mayor. If you do one thing as Mayor of London, make London safe.
Well, listen, it's a fact that the youth and crime advisor to David Cameron and George Osborne, when the cuts began in our police services and our youth services, was Shaun. It's also a fact that serious youth violence and violent crime began going up around the country since 2013. It's also a fact no mayor in the history of London has invested more in police and youth clubs and communities than us. But here's the thing, Tim. When I hear Shaun speaking, it's like an arsonist who lights a flame complaining because the fire brigade can't put out the fire quick enough. He should have the, he should accept the responsibility for advising the government of these cuts, but work with us to address the issue of violent crime. And the starting point must be the victims. Rather than playing party politics, think about the victims who suffer violent crime. Let's work with the communities to invest in young people.
Politicising an issue?
All of this would be so much easier to accept from the mayor if, as one of his first acts of Mayor of London, he removed £38 million from the police staffing budget, meaning that we were always going to have a record low number of police in London. But the most important thing is this: how do we make a change on the streets of London? That's why you hear me talking about doubling the number of police officers on the transport network. We have a transport network now that women are terrified to travel on. And let's be clear, women are not the only group of people that the mayor has failed. If you're a black Londoner, you are 4 times more likely to be murdered. We need some leadership in London. Leadership is not appointing blame after the case. Leadership is working with communities and making them safe in the first place.
Violent crime might have been beginning to go up a few years before you became mayor, but it has gone up much more while you were mayor. And while it may just be coming down now a little bit, the overall numbers, it can't be a record you're proud of.
Well, let's look at my record over the last 5 years. I have a track record. We've invested record sums in the police. We have 1,000 more police officers now than we had when I first became mayor. That is a fact. I have a track record of invested record sums in young Londoners when youth clubs were closing down, youth workers were losing their jobs, and hundreds of thousands of Londoners didn't have constructive places to go. Those are both facts, but also it is a fact that over the last 5 years, violent crime for those below the age of 25, violent crime generally, knife crime, burglaries, moped crime have gone down. I'm not complacent, but it's made more difficult when Shaun's government's making these massive cuts on our police, on youth clubs, on town halls and on public services.
You've been critical generally about his record on violent crime, but also very critical about the handling of the Sarah Everard case and the vigil. What was your problem with it?
There's two things, isn't it? The Mayor of London's job is to represent Londoners, and he came out and said it's a job for the government and the police. No, it's not. He is the chief of police in London, and he should make that representation. He found it easy enough to represent Extinction Rebellion, but why not the women of this city? Why couldn't he be there and make this vigil go ahead? He could have been
the police crime commissioner. Be clearer about what you wanted.
Yeah, one of the things that it's really important to read up on when you're seeking to become the mayor of this city and what the law is in relation to the responsibilities of the mayor. What we can't do, you don't want politicians interfering in operational matters. That's a slippery slope. What I can do and what I have been doing is not simply a record investment in the police being tough on crime, but also a record that I'm proud of being tough on the causes of crime. And in relation to those who were there at the vigil on Saturday 2 weeks ago, I've been quite clear. The police got it wrong in my view. I feel so strongly about this that I've made sure that two separate independent watchdogs are looking into the behaviour of the police.
Some people think these discussions you had very publicly about Cressida Dick, the commissioner, were ones you should have had privately with her. You may have undermined confidence in the police. Well,
I'm not going to share through the BBC the private conversation I have with the commissioner, but I was quite clear publicly in advance of the vigil that I thought was important for the vigil to be allowed to take place in a peaceful, lawful and safe way. I thought that should have happened, but also similarly, I think the police got it wrong in relation to what they did during the night. But you know what? I think it is possible to reduce violent crime. I think it is possible for women and girls to be safer, but it's made much more difficult with these cuts from the government over the last 10 years. Thousands of officers lost, thousands of police staff lost, massive cuts to women's services. It's no good to now complain about it when the advisor to the government...
with a framework of austerity.
The mayor's absolutely failed. Let's be clear. He removed £38 million from the budget as his first act of mayor. He also went on to threaten to take an extra £105 million away from the police. But look, if you're at home in London now, what do you think about crime line? When I got in the cab to come here today, the first thing the cab driver said to me is, what are you going to do about knife crime in London? It's out of control. The mayor has not got a handle on it. This is a record. Well, it's not a record to be proud of.
The problem is, not only do we have fantasy figures, we have fantasy conversations as well. It is a fact that during the 8 years when Shaun's friend Boris Johnson was the mayor, record numbers of police officers going, police staff going, police stations going down. It's also a fact.
It's also a fact.
Shaun may not like it, wants to interrupt me. It's also a fact that those services that women and girls rely upon, the youth clubs that young people rely upon, were shut down on the advice of the government's youth and crime advisor, one Mr. Shaun Bailey.
It's also a fact that Sadiq Khan has failed in London. There are black communities that are traumatised. There are women that are scared to come out on the street. And the mayor said those words and took no responsibility for them. That is why I'm saying to Londoners, when I'm mayor, I will get 4,000 youth workers on the streets. Tim. I will give 32 youth zones to make sure that Londoners have a positive outlook, somewhere to go.
Here's the difference. A candidate who wants to talk down London and a candidate standing up for London. That's the choice.
The choice here is a choice of failure, more of the same old failure, or a fresh start with me. This is about how we move London forward. Cab driver telling me that crime is out of control in London. The stats telling me that crime is out of control in London. Let's look at it like this. How can the mayor look the black community in the face? How can he look women in the face and say he's proud of his record when the streets are not safe for either of those two groups? We've had an 86% rise in knife crime. That's why you hear me talking about stop and search. That's why you hear me talk about scan and search. We need to make the streets of London safe. It is not an option, it is a necessity. And I will take that leadership role. I'll take responsibility.
Again, the choice is a choice of somebody scaring Londoners to divide communities, or a mayor who wants to support Londoners and unite communities.
This is where we see that Sadiq Khan has been hiding in his ivory tower. It's not me scaring Londoners. The cab driver asked me about it just a month ago. My good friend's son was murdered. I cannot tell you the pain that she's going through and how upsetting it is. I spoke to a young boy in Croydon who said to me he's doing really well in school, young black guy, doing really well in school. He said to me he's spending more time working on his safety than he's working in school now. He's afraid. If the mayor thinks the streets of London are safe, I ask Londoners, make your mind up. Do you feel safe in London now?
Here's the point.
Very briefly, because I think we're getting a clear impression here. We're not going to get agreement between you on this one.
Well, if Shaun felt so strongly about this, why did he advise the government to close down our youth clubs? If Shaun felt so strongly about this, why did he advise the government to cut our police? If Shaun felt so strongly about this, why is he so scared to stand up to the government?
Tim, let me say this to you. I've been a youth worker for 20 years. I know the
It doesn't show, mate.
What was I doing for the government? I was starting the biggest youth project this country's ever seen. 600,000 young people have gone through that. If the mayor wants to deflect, it just highlights to Londoners, we will not solve crime in London when you have a mayor who stands up and says it will take 10 years to do it and won't take responsibility.
We've given this a reasonable airing. We must move on to the pandemic, which has taken such a toll on so many people. I mean, before we get on to looking at who's best going to get London out of this, what have you individually or each of you missed most about this last year? What's been the hardest thing?
Not hugging my mum. It's been really hard. I've not seen her properly for some time, and looking forward to being able to hug her.
Hardest thing?
I would say the mental health of my children, they need their friendship groups. Those mixing the development is really, really important. I've also not been able to see my mum because she's an asthmatic, but we've had some contact through Zoom. My children have not had enough contact with their peer group.
And so, OK, who's best placed to get London back on its feet economically? It's had such harm.
I mean, the first thing I say about London, the failing here was the confusion around, is the network safe, is it not safe? So people just abandoned it wholesale, which is a shame, because London is a city that thrives on footfall. You can sell coffee, you can sell insurance. We need to get those people back into the centre of London.
Are you accusing Sadiq Khan of locking down too hard?
Well, no, I'm accusing him of causing confusion in the beginning. 1 minute he was for the lockdown, the next minute he wasn't.
Answer that.
Choice is straightforward. Again, talking down London or standing up for London. We've got a costed plan so we can build London back better after the pandemic with a brighter future for our city. £544 million, which includes £6 million to promote central London. It includes £32 million to make sure Londoners have the skills for the jobs we're creating. It includes £499 million from utility companies to create more jobs.
But
all we have is scare stories from Shaun Bailey.
All of that doesn't matter if you've lost your job today. And the mayor could have avoided so much confusion in London. The amount of people I've spoken to said, Shaun, I'm a security guard. I have to come into work. Why isn't the tube not clean? Who remembers all the pictures of the dirty buses after the mayor assured us they're being cleaned? If we want London to get on a fresh foot and a fresh start, we have to encourage people.
You were in October, weren't you? You were in October saying that you thought perhaps we were locking down too hard or had locked down too hard. How does that look now, given we were on the verge of a second wave?
This has always been about safety for us as individuals, our health safety, and also the safety of our economy. Because I tell you what now, the amount of lockdowns, the amount of flip-flopping that Sadiq Khan has had, he needs to look people in the eye and tell them where their job has gone. There's people who are panicked at this moment. We need to help them.
And on that note, we know that obviously we'll need a lot of money and a lot of help from government. Can I just ask this one?
Well, no, it's really important.
Yeah, we can bring it up in a second. But let me ask this one first about it. As an attitude to government and how you get on with government, very important. Presumably we both agree. Is it better, megaphone or quiet diplomacy? Is it better to be condemning government or is it working consensus? What do you think,
Let's deal with a really important point that Shaun raised. The choice also is between a lockdown sceptic, as Shaun was, or somebody who sees that the health and the economy are intertwined. There are 18,000 families in London grieving the loss of a loved one. Some of those, I'm afraid, have lost their lives because of the confusion caused by people like Shaun Bailey encouraging people to go to work when it wasn't safe to do so. It's quite clear. And that's why it's really important. There is a public inquiry and a reckoning for those responsible for the premature deaths of Londoners that need not have happened.
Isn't it interesting? Londoners, we sat at home now wondering, why is the mayor so busy putting words in my mouth? Let's be clear. I've always said it's about people's safety. I used to sit on the board of a hospital. Public health is a passion for mine. I want people to be safe. But there's 300,000 plus Londoners who've lost their job. So when you ask the question, is it about antagonising the government or working with the government? Of course it's about working with the government. If civil servants and the government do not trust you, then you cannot get a good deal for London. And boy, are we going to need a good
and
deal.
are we seeing that? Let's go on to that point specifically about getting back on the question of transport.
We need a fresh start there for sure.
Are you saying you're going to get a better deal from government on this, on Transport for London and the lack of fares? Are you blaming him for people not coming in, paying their fares and travelling during a pandemic?
This isn't about blame. This is about getting London back on its feet. It's about that fresh start. How do we forge forward? And everybody knows you need to have a good relationship with the government. It doesn't mean you pander to them, but picking fights for no reason to look like you're working doesn't help anybody.
To be fair to Shaun...
It's an issue. It could cost London.
To be fair to Shaun, he does have a track record of having the government's ear. He was the youth and crime advisor who advised them to cut from our police and advised them to close the youth clubs down. My point is this. What London wants is a mayor to stand up for our city, not to talk it down.
Is this government going to give you much or help you? Is it inclined to help you? Is it shown that sort of evidence?
I think what Londoners don't want is a mayor in the pocket of the Prime Minister. Neither Ken Livingstone or Boris Johnson were in the pocket of the Prime Ministers. Neither am I. Shaun Bailey would be.
What Londoners want is a mayor who's effective. What Londoners want is a representative. One of the things that happened at the beginning of the pandemic period, the mayor went missing at our time of need. I remember writing to him, begging him to give TfL staff protective clothing. He was nowhere to be found. We need a representative in London. We need someone who takes responsibility. Every time you hear the mayor say the words government, I think he's abandoned his representation. He's abandoned what he's meant to be doing. And I would say this to Londoners, ask yourself, do you think that Sadiq Khan can get that deal? Ask yourself what we want moving forward. We want someone who gives us a fresh start, who points in the correct direction and will take on the government or anybody else.
Briefly, let's just deal with this about how much you cost Londoners. Obviously, you're putting the council tax up next year, your share by 10%, 30 quid, at a time when Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, is attacking the government over putting up the council tax. Is that the right decision? Are you hitting people hard when they are thinking in terms of recovery?
I think it's really important to deal with responsibility. And so it's really important that I accept responsibility because of my policies for reducing the toxic air in our city by more than a third, because of my policies against government advice. I should accept responsibility for keeping free travel for under 18s, for over 60s, and not extending the congestion charge to the North Circular and the South Circular, like the government wants me to do. I should accept responsibility for that. I should also accept responsibility for freezing fares over the last 5 years, which has helped the average family by more than £200 and bringing in the Hopper bus fare used more than 500 million journeys. I'm more than happy to accept. And I could go on. Let me go on.
Let's hear from Shaun.
What about the record number of council homes started last year, more than any year since 1983?
If you are
what
one
about
of
the record numbers of
4.5
youth clubs invested from City Hall?
Let's hear from Shaun.
If you're one of the 4.5 million Londoners who saw your fares go up in that period, you know that there was no fare freeze for you. You realise that fare freeze was for tourists. That put TfL in a really sticky financial situation. If you're one of the Londoners who did not get Crossrail, £3.6 billion, the biggest bailout of any institution in this country. It cost Londoners £5.1 billion. And if you're sat at home now thinking billions, it means nothing to me. What it means is higher fares. What it means, the mayor tried to sneak a fares rise past you. It's in the TfL business plan from 2019.
Come back on that then.
Another example, talking down London while I'm standing up for our city. The idea to suggest that the reason why TfL has financial issues is because of our policies is believed by nobody. Is Shaun honestly saying the reason why privatised train operating companies, the reason why British Airways, the reason why John Lewis, the reason why Stagecoach, the reason why Go Ahead are having issues is because of my fares freeze? It's nonsense. And by the way, Tim, it's really important to deal with the facts. The deficit of TfL that I inherited, which was £1.5 billion, reduced by 71%. We've reduced the number of agency staff. We've reduced our office space. We've managed to increase our cash reserves. We've managed to freeze the fares of our top staff.
Which you'll deny very briefly, and then we'll wrap up.
All of which are posed by Shaun as Prime Minister.
To try to link the plight of business across the country and in London to the policies that Sadiq Khan made, for me, is ridiculous. What we need in London is a fresh start. We need TfL to have an infrastructure bank, like I proposed, that will give them the funds to run for years properly so they can develop the structure we have. We need sponsorship in London to keep travel for over 60s and under 18s free, instead of a mayor who passes his financial failure on straight to London.
Just a snapshot that we've achieved today, but let's just get a final kind of thought. Do you guys, I mean, we're getting on famously, of course, but do you like each other? I mean, do you have respect for each other? You know each other a bit, the London Assembly and the Mayor? Who's going to answer that one first?
For me, it's not personal. Of course, I respect Sadiq. He's got a big job. He's the Mayor of London. He has things to do. I respect all of my colleagues. One of the great things about the London Assembly is how collegiate we work.
I've got to be honest, some of the things Shaun has said about Eid, about Diwali, about women, about girls, about multiculturalism, about those that receive benefits, I get deeply upset by. They're not my values,
Okay.
they're not them values, and I hope Londoners reject those values on May the 6th.
Well, thanks for both of you for coming in. It's a first taste of what's to come, only 6 weeks to go.